London, 1884. The Hartwell name still carried a faint gleam in the corridors of Mayfair, though its luster had dimmed with debt and years of quiet decline. That evening, however, Lady Evelyn Hartwell shone as though misfortune had never known her. Beneath the glow of 1,000 candles, she stood at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands resting lightly upon the ivory folds of her gown, her breath steady, her smile serene. The orchestra trembled into another waltz, and gold spilled across the polished floor in rippling light. Everyone whispered her name, for all believed this would be her night of restoration, the night she would be formally claimed by Viscount Ashcombe. He was late, but then, men of means often were, and the ton forgave such arrogance in those who could afford it. Evelyn's mother, pale from years of worry and illness, pressed a trembling hand to her daughter's arm. "Remember, darling," she murmured, "dignity above all. They must never see you hope too much." Evelyn nodded, her throat tightening. Hope was the one luxury she had never been able to afford, yet tonight it bloomed uncontrollably within her. When the great doors opened at last, a hush fell over the ballroom. The Viscount entered with an easy smile, his uniform gleaming, his presence commanding. The sea of silk and chatter parted for him. Evelyn's heart quickened, a soft, secret rhythm beneath her stays. This was her deliverance, the end of the long humiliation of want. Soon, her mother would rest. Soon, she would no longer hear the whispered pity of drawing rooms. The orchestra ceased, and Lord Ashcombe raised his hand for silence. "My friends," he began, voice rich with confidence, "tonight I am blessed beyond measure. It is my honor to announce my engagement." He paused, smiling toward the staircase. Every gaze followed his. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her fan. "To Lady Arabella Montrose." For a moment, the air seemed to vanish. The chandeliers above blurred into a feverish haze. Someone gasped. Evelyn did not. She cannot. Her hand fell limp at her side, and the fan slipped soundlessly to the floor. Around her, whispers began to hiss and bloom like fire through dry grass. Lady Arabella, glowing in white silk, descended the staircase with studied modesty, her smile sweetly cruel. Ashcombe bowed as applause began, shallow and uncertain. Evelyn's mother made a faint, strangled sound before collapsing into the nearest chair. No one approached Evelyn. The crowd curved away from her, careful not to brush against the contagion of her disgrace. She stood perfectly still, her cheeks white as porcelain, her lips trembling only once before she forced them into stillness. Somewhere, the violins resumed, playing too cheerfully for what remained of her life. She could not flee, not yet. That would confirm the gossip, complete her ruin. Instead, she lifted her chin and took a slow breath, as her governess once taught her. Her vision sharpened, details cutting through the haze. The sheen of wax on the floor, the glint of diamonds at other women's throats, the deliberate, averted eyes of men who had once begged for a dance card. Her shame was exquisite in its clarity. It felt almost holy, as though the world itself had turned to glass. It was then that she saw him. At the far edge of the ballroom, near the shadows of the colonnade, a tall figure stood apart from the glittering crowd. He wore no expression that she could name. His gaze, steady and unflinching, found hers across the room. The Duke of Winthorne. She had heard his name whispered with equal reverence and fear. The man whose estates could stretch from one coast to the next, whose silence at Parliament was said to hold more power than speeches. A widower, they said, and cold since his loss. He had not danced in 3 years. Now he moved slow, deliberate steps across the marble, the kind that seemed to command gravity itself. Conversations faltered. The violins stuttered to a halt once more. The Duke approached the Viscount first. "My lord," he said, voice low, "when one casts aside what is pure, he should at least have the decency to look ashamed." The Viscount's smile faltered. Then the Duke turned toward Evelyn. "Lady Hartwell," he said, with a slight inclination of his head, "permit me your hand." The crowd gasped. No one refused the Duke of Winthorne, Yet no one expected him to bestow his notice on a fallen woman. Evelyn hesitated, then extended her gloved hand. His touch was warm, steady, almost reverent. He turned toward the assembly, his voice carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence. "Let it be understood," he said, "that Lady Evelyn Hartwell will not be spoken of as ruined. Not while I live." A single phrase, and the room seemed to shudder with it. Some women clutched their pearls. Others whispered frantically behind their fans. The Viscount looked as though he might protest, but the Duke's gaze silenced him. Evelyn stood beside him, dizzy with disbelief. Her ruin, moments ago a certainty, now hung suspended between two worlds, neither restored nor condemned. When he released her hand, she felt the absence like a tremor. "Good evening, my lady," he murmured, and with that, he was gone, vanishing back into the shadow from which he had come. The crowd parted silently in his wake. Evelyn remained alone at the center of the floor, every gaze still fixed upon her. Her mother stirred weakly, calling her name, but Evelyn did not move. The violins began once more, this time softer, uncertain. Beneath the music, a new whisper threaded through the room, not of pity, but of awe. And though her heart still ached with humiliation, Evelyn lifted her head. For the first time that night, she allowed herself a single, disbelieving thought. Why would a man like that defend me? The rain began at dawn, soft and relentless, painting London in shades of melancholy gray. Evelyn sat beside the window of her modest drawing room, watching droplets trace slow, trembling paths down the glass. Since the night of the ball, her name had become both weapon and spectacle. Every newspaper column spoke in veiled insinuations. Every parlor murmured of her downfall. Society fed upon disgrace, and she was its chosen feast. Her mother, frail and coughing, had taken to her bed. Each morning brought a new letter of condolence, disguised as curiosity. Friends who once crowded their doorstep now crossed the street to avoid recognition. Only silence remained faithful. Then, that morning, a carriage stopped outside their narrow townhouse, black lacquered, bearing the crest of Winthorne. Evelyn's breath caught. The footman, solemn and gloved, delivered a sealed envelope. No note of explanation accompanied it, only a heavy stillness that seemed to carry the Duke's presence even in absence. Inside, upon thick cream paper, rested a small velvet case. Evelyn hesitated before opening it. Within lay a sapphire brooch, deep, clear, and cold as the sea. She recognized it from portraits of the late Duchess of Winthorne, a piece never seen in public since her passing. Alongside it, a single line in dark ink. "For your defense against cruelty, not adornment." Her hands trembled. The words were not romantic. They were something rarer, a promise of respect in a world that had denied her any. Her mother, when she saw the brooch, gasped in alarm. "My child, you must return at once. To accept such a gift, it is unthinkable. It will only fuel their tongues." Evelyn's fingers brushed the sapphire. "Then let them speak," she said quietly. "I will not hide from kindness, even if it costs me peace." The next day, she pinned the brooch at her throat and stepped once more into the light of society. It was a luncheon hosted by the Marchioness of Darnell, a gathering Evelyn attended only to prove she still could. Conversation faltered when she entered. Eyes widened. Some whispered prayers. Others sharpened their words like knives. Lady Arabella, now Viscountess Ashcombe, approached her with the delicate cruelty of one who knows she is safe. "My dear Lady Hartwell," she drawled, "what a daring choice. I had not realized mourning suited you so well." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Mourning, my lady? Why, yes, for the death of your reputation, though I see you've chosen an heirloom to replace it." Arabella's gaze flicked to the sapphire. "His Grace must be exceedingly generous." Before Evelyn could reply, the crowd's murmuring shifted. A ripple of motion swept through the hall. The Duke of Winthorne had arrived. He was never expected at such trivial gatherings. His presence was thunder in a drawing room. He crossed the floor without hesitation, his dark coat trailing faint scent of rain and tobacco. "Lady Hartwell," he said, bowing with quiet precision, "you wear the brooch." Evelyn met his gaze. "You instructed me to defend against cruelty, Your Grace." I obeyed. His mouth curved slightly. Not a smile, but something near it. "Then I am relieved to see it serves its purpose." Arabella's composure cracked. "Surely, Your Grace, you do not mean to suggest." But the Duke turned to her, his tone glacial. "I mean only what is evident. A woman's dignity, Lady Ashcombe, is not a trinket to be stolen or returned. It belongs to her alone." The silence that followed was thick with awe and danger. Evelyn felt the room tilt, half in fear, half in exhilaration. She sensed that he had not come for conversation, but for declaration. When he extended his hand, she understood his intent before he spoke. "Will you dance, Lady Hartwell?" The air seemed to tighten around them. No one refused the Duke, yet no one dared join him either. Evelyn's heart thundered. To accept was to court scandal. To refuse was to wound the only man who had shown her mercy. Slowly, she placed her gloved hand in his. As they began to waltz, whispers erupted like wind through leaves. The violins hesitated, then found their rhythm again, hesitant, trembling. His hand rested at her back, firm yet respectful. Beneath the candlelight, she saw not pity in his eyes, but recognition, the kind that stripped away pretense and left only truth. "You must not let them break you," he murmured, low enough for her alone. "They mistake cruelty for strength." Evelyn's voice was barely a breath. "And what do you mistake me for, Your Grace?" His gaze held hers, unyielding. Courage disguised as grace. The words stole her breath. Around them, the world blurred, silk, perfume, and scandal dissolving into meaningless shimmer. For one fragile moment, she felt seen not as ornament or ruin, but as something rare and untamed. When the music ended, he bowed slightly. "Until London learns decency," he said, "you will have my protection." Then he turned and left, as abruptly as he had come, leaving the room in stunned silence. That night, Evelyn sat once more at her window. The brooch caught the lamplight, scattering blue fire across the walls. She wondered if gratitude could be as dangerous as love, if the two were not, at times, indistinguishable. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her maid entered, pale and trembling, holding a sealed letter. The wax bore the Duke's crest once more. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she broke the seal. Inside, a brief message in the same firm hand. "I leave for Winthorne Hall tomorrow. If you wish to know the truth behind my words, come before the rain ends." She looked toward the window, where dawn was just beginning to pale the horizon. Outside, the rain still fell, patient, endless, waiting for her answer. The road to Winthorne Hall wound through moors darkened by rain, a silver thread through a wilderness of heather and stone. Evelyn sat within the Duke's carriage, the air thick with damp and silence. She had not intended to come, had sworn, in fact, that she would not. Yet his letter had burned beneath her pillow all through the night, and by dawn, her defiance had withered into restless resolve. When the carriage halted before the great house, she drew a breath. Winthorne Hall rose like a monument to solitude, its towers lost in mist, its windows flickering faintly against the storm. The rain swept her face as she stepped down, each drop sharp as memory. The Duke himself awaited her at the entrance, unguarded, his dark coat soaked through. "You came," he said simply. "I came," she replied, "not for promise or favor, but for truth." He inclined his head, then offered his arm. She hesitated before taking it, and together they crossed the threshold into silence. The hall was vast, lined with portraits whose eyes followed them like unspoken witnesses. The scent of oak and smoke lingered in the air. Somewhere deeper in the house, thunder rumbled as if the sky itself resented their trespass. He led her to the library, where a fire struggled against the chill. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, filled with leather volumes and dust that glittered faintly in the glow. She removed her gloves with deliberate slowness. "You asked me to come before the rain ends," she said. "Now I am here. Speak, Your Grace." The Duke stood near the hearth, his gaze fixed on the flames. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "I knew your father." The words fell between them like stones into deep water. My father, Evelyn's voice was almost a whisper. You cannot mean. I was a young officer then, he continued, reckless, full of certainty. During the Afghan campaign, a band of U.S. was caught beyond the river. Your father, Captain Hartwell, stayed behind to cover our retreat. He saved my life. I promised him I would repay the debt, though he told me never to speak of it. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her. She remembered faint stories her mother once told of bravery, of betrayal, of a father's death far from home. So it was duty, then, she said quietly. All this, your defense, your letters, your gift, it was gratitude. His gaze lifted to hers, sharp and sudden. It began as gratitude, he said. But that night at the ball, when they sought to humiliate you, something shifted. I saw your composure, your restraint in the face of cruelty. It was not your father I remembered then, but the worth of what he left behind. She turned away, her pulse racing. Do not say such things, your grace. You owe me no flattery. I owe you truth, he answered. And the truth is that I have thought of little else since that night. The rain lashed against the windows, as though trying to silence him. Evelyn closed her eyes, trembling between fear and something perilously close to hope. You cannot mean to love me, she whispered. It would destroy what remains of your name. He moved closer, though still at a careful distance. My name has survived worse than love, he said. It did not die when I buried my wife, nor when I swore I would never feel again. But if I am to be condemned for loving you, then let the sentence fall swiftly. The confession hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Evelyn felt her resolve falter. She had come seeking honesty, yet now that she had it, she longed for ignorance. You must not, she murmured, shaking her head. You pity me. That is all. He reached for the mantle, his knuckles pale in the firelight. Do you think pity would make me invite scandal? Would I risk all for the comfort of condescension? Her silence was answer enough. He exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders. You are afraid, he said softly. Yes, she admitted, afraid that I might believe you. A crack of thunder shook the room. She turned toward the window, where rain streaked down in frantic rivers. In the glass, their reflections stood side by side, two figures bound by circumstance, divided by station. He joined her there, though not too near. You think I would ruin you, he said, but it is you who would redeem me. Evelyn laughed once, bitterly. You mistake me for something holy. I am only a woman trying not to drown. Then let me be the shore, he said quietly. The words, spoken so simply, shattered her composure. She turned to face him fully, the firelight gilding the tears on her cheeks. You cannot say such things, she whispered. Not unless you mean to make them true. He met her gaze, unwavering. I have never spoken more truly. For a heartbeat, silence consumed them, broken only by the storm's relentless rhythm. Then she stepped back, trembling, the weight of what had been said pressing upon her like the weather itself. I cannot answer you tonight, she said. My world has already burned once. I will not step into the ashes again. He bowed his head slightly. Then I will wait, he said, for as long as it takes. She gathered her cloak, the sapphire at her throat catching firelight as she turned toward the door. Do not, she whispered. The world will not forgive you for this. He smiled faintly, a weary, haunted thing. Then let the world do as it will. It has forgiven me for far worse. Evelyn hesitated, her hand upon the door. The storm outside had softened into steady rain, and through it came the faintest glimmer of dawn. She looked back once, finding him still by the fire, tall, unbending, and unbearably alone. And for the first time, she wondered not whether he could love her, but whether she had the strength to resist him. London awoke beneath a sky the color of pewter, heavy with the promise of snow. The city glittered faintly beneath its shroud of frost, as though determined to appear serene, even when the air itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. Evelyn's carriage rattled along Pall Mall, her heart pacing faster than the hooves striking the stone. It had been a fortnight since she left Winthorne Hall, and yet his words still haunted her. Then let the world do as it will. She had tried to silence them with reason, but reason, she found, could not quiet longing. The invitation from the palace had arrived that morning, a winter ball in honor of the royal household. She had no intention of attending, not until she learned that the Duke of Winthorne had returned to London. Rumors swirled like snowflakes, that he had withdrawn from court, that he meant to leave England, that he was already promised to a foreign countess. She told herself it did not matter. And yet, when the carriage stopped before Buckingham's gates, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, the ballroom shimmered like an illusion. Chandeliers hung like frozen stars, and beneath them, London's finest moved in gilded patterns of civility. Evelyn stood at the threshold in a gown of palest ivory, her sapphire brooch gleaming like a secret against her throat. Heads turned. Whispers began. They said she was brave to show her face, or foolish, or desperate. She had learned not to care which. Lady Arabella was among the first to approach, resplendent in crimson silk, her husband smirking behind her. "My dear Lady Hartwell," she purred, "how fortunate you are. Even after ruin, you managed to find an audience. Tell me, do you still wear the Duke's favor as your only dowry?" Evelyn's voice was steady. "It was never a favor, my lady. It was a promise." The Viscount laughed softly. "Promises from Winthorne are costly things. Best pray he keeps them." Evelyn felt the sting, but held her ground. "I do not pray," she said. "I endure." The music swelled, drowning their laughter. She turned away, her eyes scanning the crowd, and then she saw him. The Duke of Winthorne stood near the dais, dressed in black and silver, his expression composed yet unreadable. When he saw her, the faintest shadow crossed his face, something between wonder and regret. He began to move toward her, the crowd parting as though compelled by an invisible force. When he reached her, the violins fell silent. "Lady Hartwell," he said, bowing slightly, "you should not have come." "Nor you," she replied softly. "And yet here we are." His gaze flicked to the sapphire at her throat. "You still wear it." "It reminds me of what truth sounds like," she said. Something in his composure broke. "And yet truth," he murmured, "is rarely kind." Before Evelyn could answer, a voice called across the room. The Viscount, half drunk, emboldened by his wife's laughter. "Your Grace, the city would be grateful if you settled the matter plainly. Is the lady your charity or your conquest?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. The Duke turned, his eyes darkening with a quiet, terrifying calm. He walked toward the dais where the Queen's representatives sat, and the assembly fell into reverent silence. "Your Grace," one of them began, but he raised a hand. "Enough." His voice carried through the vast room, low but resonant. "For weeks, London has feasted upon slander. You have turned an innocent woman's name into your evening's entertainment, and you have mistaken my silence for shame. Let me relieve you of both." He turned to face the crowd fully, his gaze sweeping the glittering assembly. "I have endured the judgment of men, the loss of a title's meaning, the emptiness of propriety. But I will not endure a world where virtue is punished and deceit applauded. Lady Evelyn Hartwell has been wronged before you all. It ends tonight." Gasps rippled through the hall. Evelyn stood frozen, her gloved hands trembling. The Duke took a breath, steady but raw. "You ask what she is to me. I will tell you. She is not my charity. She is not my conquest. She is the first person in years before whom I have not felt hollow." No one dared move. The Queen's emissary opened his mouth, then closed it again. The Duke's voice deepened. "And if society finds this declaration unbecoming of my rank, then let my rank be damned. For I have no use for honor that cannot recognize grace when it stands before it." He turned to Evelyn. In his eyes she saw not possession, but devotion stripped bare of pride. He extended his hand, unloved and unguarded. "If you will have me," he said softly, "then let it be known, tonight and forever, that I am yours." A hush fell, so complete it seemed even the chandeliers listened. Evelyn's heart thudded painfully. She could feel every gaze upon her, every breath suspended. To take his hand would be to defy the world. To refuse it would be to wound her own soul. She moved toward him, her steps slow, deliberate. When her fingers touched his, warmth surged through her, a promise of safety, not possession. You do not know what they will say, she whispered. I do, he said, and I no longer care. The orchestra began again, softly at first, then swelling like a tide. The Duke drew her close, and they began to dance. Uninvited, unpermitted, unstoppable. Around them, the world rearranged itself into something new. For the first time since her humiliation, Evelyn did not feel watched. She felt chosen, and in the quiet between one heartbeat and the next, she realized that all her shame had been leading here, to this impossible, reckless grace. When the waltz ended, applause did not come. Only silence, thick and reverent. The Duke's hand lingered in hers as he whispered, "They will talk of us for years." "Then let them," she said, lifting her chin. And as snow began to fall beyond the palace windows, soft and endless, Evelyn understood that ruin was never the opposite of love, only its beginning.